China is expanding its influence around the globe as the CCP fosters new relationships, some with American allies, in an attempt to challenge the U.S. as a global superpower.
Correspondent Alex Salvi is in Rome with Beijing's latest efforts.
French President Emmanuel Macron's trip to China and his subsequent remarks about not siding with the United States agenda is forcing some to take a hard look at Beijing's reach into other countries. The U.S. pushes a hardline stance against China, while some of its allies perform a balancing act with security and trade interests. President Macron, for example, bringing 50 business executives along with him on the trip, proving it was mostly about economics. Beijing is ramping up its role on the international stage, last month brokering a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia despite decades of hostilities, and weeks earlier advancing talks with South American countries to establish trade agreements. Last week, Spain's prime minister meeting with President Xi Jinping ahead of Madrid taking over the EU Council later this year. And last November, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz becoming the first European leader to meet with Xi in over 3 years. For some in Berlin, they believe the goal isn't about increasing ties with China, but instead divorcing themselves from the U.S.
Friendship with each other also means breaking with the existing relationship of extreme subservience by Germany on matters of U.S. foreign policy, one that is marked by war, breaches international law, and supports coups. The U.S. administration gives the impression they don't actually want allies, just loyal vassals. Yet fewer countries around the world are prepared to accept this, and that is good news.
China is also attempting to use its close ties with Russia to play the role of mediator in the conflict with Ukraine, with President Vladimir Zelensky saying he's open to the idea. After Macron's visit to China and his unwillingness to side with the U.S. and Taiwan, Republican Senator Marco Rubio says if Europe follows this approach, it may be time for the U.S. to revisit its support for Ukraine and focus on more proximate threats to American interests. In Rome, for Newsmax, I'm Alex Salvi.
All right, thanks, Alex. And here with his reaction is the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War and the Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang. Of course, Tom and Deneen Borelli are still with us. Gordon, what do you think is the most dangerous part of what China is doing now? We have the new relationships. We have their threats about Taiwan. Of course, seemingly coming closer and closer in every way they can into the United States, buying up land and beyond. The one biggest threat, as you see it?
The biggest threat would be China's support for the Russian war effort in Ukraine, because I think that the future of this century actually is going to be written on the Ukrainian battlefields, especially the future of Taiwan. If Russia is allowed to keep any portion of Ukrainian territory, the Chinese are going to see that as a big green light for territorial ambitions of their own. If Russia is expelled, I think Xi Jinping will think twice about what he can do on his own periphery. But of course, there's so many other dangerous things that China is doing. It's actually hard to pick among all of them, but I think the support for the Ukraine war is the most important one.
Yeah, tell me if my conclusion here is right about Macron's visit. Xi was really able to manipulate him, his ego, his position in the world, make him feel like you are one of the biggest powers. You, France, really are heading the EU. And by doing that, Xi is more likely to be able to get away with things related to Ukraine as well as Taiwan.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also Xi Jinping's outreach to Germany and others. But ultimately, the problem for Europe is that if they want to be autonomous, if they want to be independent, and I can certainly understand that, then they're going to have to pay for their own defense. And so far, they have been unwilling to do that. And right now, we don't see any real indication on the part of Europe to actually spend for their own defense. So until that happens, Europe is completely dependent on the United States. Macron can say whatever he wants. This is like de Gaulle right after the Second World War, but it isn't going to matter very much because it's American military might that defends Western Europe from now an increasingly aggressive Russia.
Deneen, your thoughts?
Well, I would like to ask Gordon a question, actually. Hello, Gordon. Deneen and Tom Borelli are here as well. So last week, Speaker McCarthy met with the president from Taiwan. And your thoughts on why Joe Biden did not meet with the president of Taiwan? What does China have on Joe Biden?
Well, certainly on the second part of that question, what does China have on Biden? Apparently a lot with regard to Hunter, because last month Hunter's legal team actually said, well, they paid $1 million or so to Hunter as, quote, good faith seed money or as good faith seed funds. Now, that's an admission of corruption in my book, because corruption is the only explanation why money of that amount would be paid in these circumstances. But, no U.S. president has met the Taiwan counterpart since, 1978 or so. Biden not doing so is sort of consistent with that American foreign policy. But really now we do need to have the American president meet the Taiwan president, because things are now so dangerous and we have to reestablish deterrence. So I think that Biden actually failed this test, or Deneen.
Yeah, Tom, it seems like President Biden really is living in the past.
Oh, absolutely. He's not being proactive at all. I mean, we've seen China meet with Saudi Arabia, with Putin, now with Macron in France. I mean,
outmaneuvering.
And I don't hear anything from the State Department. I don't hear anything from Biden. And I think that silence is deafening. That's another sign of complete weakness. Any other Republican president would be saying something. Maybe even some Democrat presidents would be saying something. Because this is not just one domino. They're lining up one by one.
Yeah, great point. All right, Gordon Chang, thanks so much for being with us. And Deneen and Tom Borelli, also so happy that you stopped by with us this hour. And of course, always appreciate your insights and opinions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.